headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Let's hear once again from the American president. Now, just to put this into context, he was speaking last night in Warsaw, which of course is in Poland, and he was pledging support really by visiting there for the fact that NATO countries, Poland being one of them, are getting the support from the US in the context of the war taking place in Ukraine. And, the comments being made by Joe Biden, where he seemingly asks for Putin to be removed as Russian president, they have now been denied by the White House. The White House say that he didn't mean that Putin should be removed as president. Well, why don't you listen for yourself?
Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principle, hope and light.
I mean, sort of pretty much saying it. Petri, what would you like to say?
At the end of that speech wasn't there. The pertinent line was, for God's sake, this man can't remain in power. So it was a throwaway comment that he made, and the White House will have said that was off script, and it doesn't speak for what we're saying.
Let's see what Tobias Ellwood has to say about that. Conservative MP for Bournemouth East, chair of the Defence Select Committee. Morning to you, Tobias.
Good morning to you.
So, what did Joe Biden mean, and why is he now denying it?
Well, it wasn't the sort of language you expect from the leader of the Western world. We all want Putin to go. The Russian people need to determine that themselves. And no doubt with sanctions building up, meaning that Russia can never return to the international stage economically, it is something that they need to reconcile themselves with. But when you see a US president making such statements, it then gives the impression to the Russian people that they are being attacked in this way. China will also interpret this language in a similar sort of fashion. It was unwise, it was undiplomatic, and it's going to cause problems. This is why you're seeing the White House ride back on this. But when you see tense situations such as developing between two superpowers such as this, we need to be very, very cautious about the public language that is used.
But what's wrong with him saying it? I mean, if what you just essentially said, and forgive me if I'm paraphrasing, is that most Western democracies want to see Putin going. Most people want to see that being the outcome of this. But Joe Biden can't say that, and he shouldn't say that. Well, why shouldn't he say it if that's what people want?
No, because it isn't right for any country to demand regime change in this way when you're involved in trying to protect and support Ukraine itself. That is our current.
We've gone to war based on wanting regime change. We went into Iraq wanting regime change. We've bombed people based on wanting regime change. We wanted regime change in Syria when it came to Assad. We sort of tried this route before in Ukraine.
And
so
look
it
where
seems.
It gets you. Look where it gets you. What happens is that actual language is used by their own media machine to rally support from the very people that you want to actually rally up against the leader itself. So the Russian people, who, remember, their diet of news is not talk radio, it is not the free press, it is what's fed to them by the Russian media machine, will now take this, and they themselves, whilst they may not like Putin, will not like the idea that somebody is telling them what to do. And we've seen that in the past. President Tito was a great example of this in former Yugoslavia. A very unpopular person, but because he had outside pressure placed on him, then the actual population itself rallied to support their own person. Yes, he's their problem, but it's for them to deal with it, not somebody else to tell them actually what to do. So you must
feel quite similar then about Russian sanctions then, and the way in which they are potentially galvanizing support for Putin.
No, because that's perhaps the subtle difference between the two, is the sanctions are punishing the actions that are actually taking place, but they have a byproduct there of recognizing that ultimately this is where Putin has taken their country. Putin is embarrassing their country in what they're doing. But when you see suddenly a president calling for regime change, which I don't disagree, this is what ultimately everybody wants, and ultimately what will probably happen. But you're also going to see China take a very, very dim view of this. They absolutely do not like the idea of any nation interfering with another nation in this way. But it takes us away from the focus, I'm afraid, as well. The fact that you and I are talking about it, about what's going on.
Well, no, the only reason we're talking about it is because now it's been denied, and it makes me wonder, and I'm interested to know what you think, whether a person such as Biden should be making these sorts of speeches, because words are really important during all of this, and the West now looks ridiculous as a result of making this statement and then needing to retract it when we all heard it. And it wasn't even I misspoke, it was now we're being told it wasn't said. It's a preposterous situation. It makes us look moronic.
No, we can't get away from this. This has been damaging, and we must learn from this. When we have to deal with a country such as Russia invade another state, a democratic state, it's so critical that the West stays as one, talks as one. Any language such as this, inflammatory language such as this, any direction of travel that you want to go down this road must be cleared with other nations as well. I doubt whether Britain was asked to say, we're going to go this way. What do you actually think? That, for me, is where the special relationship would have kicked in the past. And it's a reminder, I'm afraid, that there are other aspects of this that we need to improve on the international scene, given, I make this really clear, that the security in Europe is going to get worse over the next decade, not better.
Well, then what does winning mean against Putin? I've heard a lot of people saying that we must win against Putin, and if we're not saying publicly that it's about regime change, what does actually winning mean?
Well, winning for me is making sure that Ukraine wins on its terms. So there's none of any Ukraine's territory which is still occupied by Russia itself. Now, for that, we have to wake up, the West does, and recognize that we're not doing enough, providing the necessary hard power for them to push the Russians out. We're in a stalemate on the position at the moment, where Russia is leaning on more, difficult and uglier tactics, firing from afar, using standoff weapon systems to bomb civilian cities into obliteration, completely slaughtering the actual population themselves. We are just watching. We're letting Ukraine do the heavy lifting. That must actually change. Ultimately, success would be absolutely Russia itself determining that there is no future with Putin, and them themselves determining that there is another leader. But it's for them to do that rather than for us to try and say that we're going to try and do it, because it's more complicated and actually will now lead, I'm afraid, to Putin embedding himself and then using more, more dangerous methods to remain in power.
All right, Petri Hoskin, war correspondent, journalist, broadcaster, is here as well. Petri, what would you like to put to Tobias?
Morning, Tobias. Just morning. Something you said right at the beginning of this interview was that Russia would never return to the international stage. If that is the case, then what's the point in them stopping?
This is the big question for Putin, is for him to recognize, or rather the Russian people to recognize, the oligarchs, the generals in the Kremlin, that there is no future as long as Putin remains in charge. But I stress, it's for them to work that out. As soon as we start telling them what to do,
Tobias,
that's when they rally their own support.
Tobias, you didn't qualify that with unless Putin has gone. So when we're talking about statements that matter and words that matter, if that was clipped and was heard in Russia, Russia will never be able to return to the international stage. That in itself is a statement that would embed Putin further and the people of Russia.
I'm not the US president. I was born in the States, so I can
not
qualify,
yet.
but
not yet.
I can assure you that I'm not even in the British government, okay? So I can make these comments, and I can, in a way, to nudge our own people to do more, to lean into this, to recognize that Ukrainian security is European security. The fact that we're having to deal with prices in fuel going up, energy prices going up, food prices going up, is all because of Ukraine. It's in our interest to sort out Ukraine. My worry is that we're going to end up with some sort of peace deal that either allows Putin to sell a success back home because they managed to retain part of Ukraine, for example, the Donbass area, or indeed the Crimea. And then he'll then continue on. And my worry then is, where does he go in 3 or 4 years' time?
But surely
because he will not stop.
Yeah, but you say that sort of compromise would embolden Putin to go on, but the alternative is potentially World War III.
It's what he needs,
and he needs World War III.
He needs a win.
No. Let's be clear and be calm about this, and develop a more, rekindle that Cold War statecraft that allows us to make incremental decisions, proportionate responses that doesn't lead, to World War II or things escalating out of control. We've lost that art.
Respectfully, rekindle Cold War statecraft. Surely there's a big argument to say that it's that got us into this mess in the first place. The attitudes that unless Russia thinks like the West, Russia is out in the cold.
Oh, that's another ideological argument, which I wouldn't disagree with at all. But what we did was stood up to the Soviet Union to protect ourselves from that Iron Curtain wandering much, much further towards the West.
When they offered the hand of friendship to the West said, sorry, we still don't trust you. They wouldn't let them anywhere near NATO. They expanded NATO, and then we ended up with Putin as a leader. I think what you're describing is just history going to be repeating itself in a few years' time.
First of all, we stopped the Iron Curtain from moving forward. Secondly, when they came to the Cuban Missile Crisis, we looked the Russia, Soviet Union in the eye, and they backed down. And your final point about what happened with the expansion of NATO, the reason why Romania, Bulgaria, and the Baltics all wanted to join NATO is because they felt threatened by Russia. Russia itself hadn't advanced, hadn't progressed, hadn't involved itself in Western-style democracy. What you had was Putin, who was still angry at the West. They elected a leader that was ever determined to expand the Russian influence in the Slavic area that was once part of Greater Russia as well, or part of the Soviet Union. So you cannot you cannot blame these countries in the eastern.
But there is an argument to say that perhaps if Yeltsin and Gorbachev were brought into the fold when there was an opportunity to do so, we wouldn't even be talking about a Putin being in
and that
power.
is the moment. That is the moment. You're absolutely right. I was still in shorts at school at that point, so I'm afraid I can't speak too much about that. But I don't disagree with you. There was an opportunity that we didn't embrace at that time to make sure we lent in to support and advance and build up. But this is very typical, I'm afraid, of the West. Of every time we've got into the country, however well determined, however well intentioned, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, Afghanistan, we haven't had the strategic patience to stay there to rebuild indigenous capability so it can stand alone and join the international community.
I do think I think we actually pretty much the three of us agree on a lot of what we've been discussing this morning. Really interesting to get your take on it. Tobias Ellwood, Conservative MP for Bournemouth East, Chair of the Defence Select Committee.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.